I had tenure. I had tenure at the university. I walked out of the university and said, look, I can't keep my integrity and at the same time teach something I know was patently wrong. So I walked out because I saw that teaching the belief that genes control life was very, very incorrect. And it's very interesting because I did that in 1970. Now that's like 40 years ago. I was cloning stem cells back in 1967, 40 years ago. And the significance was, while I was doing this research, I was also teaching medical students. So I was teaching medical students the foundation of how cells work, the conventional story out of the textbook, genes control life, what we called it genetic determinism, the belief that genes control your traits, behavior, your physical characteristics, etc. And what my research revealed when I was studying the stem cells was this, very profound. I put one stem cell in a petri dish all by itself, and it would divide every 10 to 12 hours. So it'd be 2, 4, 8, 16 cells, 32 cells. After about 2 weeks, I had thousands of cells in the petri dish, but what was unique? They were all genetically identical. But then I did the experiment. The experiment was to take some cells out of the dish and put them into a separate dish with a different environment.
Okay.
And so the environment is a culture medium, but the culture medium to cells is like the world that we live in. It's got the air, the water, the food, all the things in it. So I take the cells out of my stem cell dish, put them in a separate dish with a different environment, and the cells form muscle. But then I went back to the same dish with genetically identical cells in it and took some cells out and put them in a different environment, and they form bone. And then I went back to the same dish with genetically identical cells and put them in a third petri dish with a different environment, and they formed fat cells. And there I was confronted with this reality. All the cells are genetically identical, but they had different fate, fat, muscle, bone. And I said, simple question, what controls the fate of cells? And the answer is the environment. It was the only thing that was different because they were all genetically identical. So I started to really say, oh my goodness, here I am teaching genes control life to the medical students, and yet the cells were revealing to me that, hey, they all had the same genes, but it was the environment that I put them in. And so the environment controlled their life. And a very simple experiment that is very profound for us today is, if I took my dish with plastic petri dish with cells in it and moved it from a healthy environment to a less than healthy environment, the cells get sick. And if I were a doctor of cells, you might say, well, what kind of drugs would you give these cells? And it turns out, no, you don't give the cells any drugs. You just take the dish from the bad environment, put it back into a good environment, and the cells will innately, naturally come back to health again. The thinking is not that much in our control. The brain is operating, as I said, 95% from the subconscious.
But how did you actually then get results in a relatively short space of time?
Well, the first thing, how does the subconscious learn? And that's a very critical thing. The conscious mind can learn from reading a book. So the subconscious mind can read a self-help book and you go, wow, that sounds really great. And then you find you read the book, but your life is still the same. And it turns out, why? And the answer is because the subconscious mind is more of a habit mind, things that you repeat over and over again.
Yes.
So the reality is, if you can stay conscious, be present, and when those negative thoughts come in our head, and psychologists tell us 70% of the time, the thoughts that are going through our head are negative and redundant, so the same negative thoughts are going through. If you could stop those thoughts, if you could hear them as they come through, like, oh, that's not going to work, or this will never happen, those kind of thoughts. If you can hear them and stop them consciously, say, no, change the belief right there, just give the more positive thing. As you repeat this more frequently and you keep repeating it, the subconscious mind begins to learn. So as a habit, if you stay conscious, and you have to work at it, and here's why people say, well, how come only 5% from conscious mind, 95% from subconscious? Because the conscious mind can think into the future and think into the past and solve problems. Then think about it yourself. Most of the time, you're thinking about something. Well, if you're thinking, you're using the conscious mind. Well, if you're using the conscious mind for thinking, then who's running the show? And the answer is, when you're not paying attention and you're thinking about what I'm going to do tomorrow, your subconscious is running the show. You have a very close friend. You know your friend's behavior. And you happen to know your friend's parent. And at some point you see that your friend shares the same behavior as their parent. So you casually volunteer, you go, you know, Bill, you're just like your dad. And that's when you have to back away from Bill. Because Bill's the first guy that says, how can you compare me to my dad? And everyone laughs because they're familiar. But I say, no, there's two very profound points from that one story. And profound point number one, Everybody else can see that Bill behaves like his dad. He got his programming from his dad. It's only Bill who doesn't see it.
Yeah.
And profound point number 2, we're all Bill. Because all of us got programming, and all of us operate with these programs, and we don't even see we're doing it. That we, even when told we're doing it, will deny that we do these behaviors because we don't even see when we're doing it. That's why it's called subconscious, below conscious. When I first started talking about it, it was from an academic conscious point of view. This is what I learned, but my subconscious programs are still exactly the same. So while I had this wonderful knowledge, my life still wasn't anything I wanted to brag about it, because it wasn't. And as you know, that old game, well, who would you like to be? And I could think of anybody I'd rather be than me. And yet, when I started to apply the new science and rewrite the subconscious so it supported me rather than the programs of limitation or disempowerment that we get from our parents and our community as children, which almost all of us get. When I put in the new programs, all of a sudden I started to find, my goodness, my life completely turned around. All wonderful things started happening in my life. I was healthier. I haven't been to a doctor in 20 years. I don't need that. I don't take any of their drugs. Why? Because most of the illness is just from the stress of not living in harmony. And when you learn to get rid of the limiting programs that we got as children and put in programs that support you, guess what? Then all of a sudden, the place turns into heaven. And it's interesting, I tell people, well, you create your own life, and then they look around and go, I don't want responsibility for this, but I say, well, you didn't know you were creating with these unconscious beliefs. And yet then I tell people, especially people that have fallen in love, and the people that have fallen head over heels in love, I say, go back to that time when you first fell in love. Let me ask you a question. Were you healthy? And oh yeah, I was healthy as anything. I said, did you have energy? I said, oh, I had so much energy, made love for days in a row without even eating. And I go, yeah, and I go, and how was life for you? It was so exciting. I couldn't wait for the next day. So I said, in this little period that you know, that I refer to as a honeymoon, I say, wasn't life like heaven on earth? And they go, well, yeah. And I go, you know, that was not an accident. That was an actual creation. And you say, but what was different that made life so heaven on earth during love? And the answer is, because you become very self-conscious of yourself. You don't rely on the habits. The day before you meet this person, you're going to go on a date. I say, especially to women, I say, how long did it take you to get dressed? And they say, well, it was 15 minutes when I was out of the house. And then I say, now, tonight, you're going to go on a date with this person who has just rocked your world. And I say, how long does it take you to get dressed? It's like, my God, it may take an hour or two. And I say, yesterday, 15 minutes, today, an hour or two. What's the difference? Yesterday, I got dressed by habit, because I get dressed every day. Yeah. But tonight, I am looking in the mirror, meaning I am self-conscious. I am making sure that I represent myself to be the best individual I can be. And when both parties are not relying on the habit, and both of them are saying, I'm creating the best I can be, they're living in the moment of the now, they're being very mindful, they're being very present, and guess what? Heaven on earth is created.